Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for our session today. We have another awesome workshop coming your way for our innovation series where we're really empowering you with the tools, mindsets, and frameworks to help you succeed in this startup process. My name is Cameron Law. I serve as the Executive Director of the Carlson Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and we're on a mission and vision really to create this premier hub for innovation and entrepreneurship here in the greater Sacramento region. And we want to support you with the tools, frameworks, and that support to enable you to have that entrepreneurial success. And we're excited to bring this innovation series to you. This is, I think, our fifth session of 11. So we've been giving you kind of some of these amazing different ways to look at your business and really give you tools to start dissecting and looking at your business from different lenses. And so today's workshop, we're going to be diving into running lean, how to systematically build a startup. And we have Ash Maurya, who I'm going to share a little bit more about his background, but he's the author of Running and Scaling Lean, and then also the founder and CEO of LEANSTACK. And so we're going to get into continuous innovation and different frameworks for you to get your business off the ground. But again, this is part of a larger series. So we have a whole number of workshops coming after this, and I'll share a link if you want to sign up for additional sessions, but we'll be diving into things such as OKRs, Pirates in the Navy, how to lead innovation within a corporation, testing business ideas, and things such as social impacts and jobs to be done. So we have a whole host of additional workshops coming your way, but we're excited to dive into ultimately how you can systematically build your startup with Ash Maurya. And introducing Ash, as I shared, he's the founder and CEO of LeanStack, a continuous innovation platform that helps startups and corporate accelerators achieve better portfolio results. For over 20 years, he has been helping founders systematically find repeatable and scalable business models using battle-tested playbooks. He's also the best-selling author and creator of the Lean Canvas, which is an amazing tool for you to build your business model and understand the risks and assumptions going into that. And he's contributed to the lean startup movement by sharing insights and frameworks on overcoming the innovator's bias and validating ideas faster and cheaper. And his personal mantra is life's too short to build something nobody wants, and is on a mission to create better founders everywhere. And so we're excited to have you all in this space here to become those better founders and to learn how you can systematically build your startup. So we'll turn it over to Ash, and we're in good hands today. And we are appreciative for you being in the space and sharing your thought leadership and expertise with everyone here. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for the great intro, Cameron, and great to meet and see a lot of you. I definitely recognize some names in the audience, so it's great to see you all here. So yeah, I do want to walk you through, since this is more of a workshop format, workshop to me implies interaction, questions, so I do want to have enough time for discussion and questions. So I will walk you through some of the pillar ideas behind my work. The visual that you're seeing here, we're going to unpack these stages and kind of define them along the way. So essentially give you this picture of what a systematic roadmap might look like, and then really just open the floor to questions. So we can take that anyway. You can put stuff in the chat. We can do that. But my preference, of course, is when we get to that, have you just unmute and ask away. We'll keep this kind of interactive and free flowing. So I'll kick things off with a short story that I like to share whenever I introduce this concept. And this is the story, some of you may have come across this before, but a story of two entrepreneurs that at the outset look very similar, but a year later, they end up in very different places. So Steve here on the left is still building his product in his metaphorical garage. He doesn't yet have product revenue. His product is half finished, but because it's half finished, he can get customers. Because he can get customers, investors tell him, get me some customers first, then we'll give you the money. And so he's in this classic catch-22. Larry, on the other hand, finds a way forward. And so that's what we are going to be obviously homing in on, is what's different about these two entrepreneurs. So the thing that I'll kind of highlight here is that when we look at these two stories, the first thing to recognize is mindsets above skill sets. So one of the part of the story, or part of the answer of why Larry kind of has a different approach, is he recognizes from the outset that we are living in different times. We used to live at a time, for those of you that may have built products maybe a decade ago or even longer, where building products was really hard. I'm not going to say building products is easy by any means, but it has become cheaper and faster. We have more access to knowledge, more access to tools. And so as a result, it has become easier to build products. We are building a lot more products today than ever before, which creates a number of challenges. From a customer standpoint, that's great because they get lots of choices. But if you are the entrepreneur building those products, that's a lot of competition. Today, when customers get these choices, one, it can be paralyzing. Which ones do they pick when all products look similar? So there's a upward pressure on trying to identify at the outset, what is your value proposition? What is your unique value proposition? And how quickly can you demonstrate that? So those are some of the realities of how one has to win today. So a lot more products being built. There's a lot more choices for customers, which increases competition and then reduces the time, the cycle time with which ideas need to achieve sufficient traction to kind of gain foot in the market. So that's one of the mindsets, speed of learning or speed of execution, however you want to define that. What separates successful entrepreneurs today is, sure, we need to work on skills, but more importantly, we need to work on the right skills. And that's what I mean by mindsets before skill sets. So I kind of contrast the two entrepreneurs from early on. So we look at the Steve story. He's working a lot like an artist, like a maker, like an inventor. He's building something amazing. So he's taking a build first approach, taking big risks doing so. And then some of the other mindsets is prioritizing technical risk or solution risk above everything else. And many of us have been there. This is actually, in many ways, the default state. I used to be a Steve. I built many products as a Steve. Some of them were successful, some of them not so successful. What bothered me, though, was the cycle time. The ones that were successful or not successful looked exactly the same on day one. It was only 2 years later that I kind of saw what was different about them. And so that was one of the things from that mantra that Cameron shared, life's too short to build something nobody wants. I realized that 2 years to figure out that something is not going to work was just too long. And so I wanted to find ways to shift more towards the innovator way of thinking, which prioritizes traction first or customer first, aims to remove big obstacles or risks before anything else. And to do that, we have to start thinking of the product differently. It's not just about building a great solution. That's part of the story, but we have to focus in more on the overall business model. So that's kind of an intro into some of the mindsets. If we look at the classic hockey stick, which I think a number of you know what this represents, this is traction or growth in a business. The inflection point, product market fit, is often considered the most significant milestone in a startup's journey. It roughly takes 2 years to get there. The sad reality, though, is that 80% of products never find it. So these are just averages. Some of you will have different mileage. Some of you will take longer, some of you will take shorter, but these are just kind of average statistics that are out there. And this timeline hasn't really changed all that much. And especially with what I said early on, when the time for an idea comes, sometimes people are too early, but when the time for an idea comes, generally in those first 2 to maybe 3 years, you're going to see some initial startups get to product market fit and start planting their beachhead, right? So we're going through this AI race right now. And the prediction, of course, will be in 2 years, you're going to see the top players kind of emerge. And then everyone else will not win in that game. They'll have to change the game or come at it differently. And so, as I mentioned before, product market fit is what's considered to be this significant milestone. The problem, of course, is that it's too far out into the future. 2 years is a far time to do, to kind of fumble along. And so I have been primarily focused these last several years on the left side of product market fit. That's where, as a LeanStack as a company, myself and my interest is really trying to make the left side more systematic and predictable than the right side. A lot of people characterize the left side like a little zigzag, the aimless wandering picture. You work on a bunch of stuff and magic happens, and then next thing you know, you have product market fit. I liken the journey more like a labyrinth. If you've ever played the labyrinth game in a maze puzzle, or if you've actually been in an actual labyrinth, the task at hand is getting out of the maze before running out of resources. If we put this in the startup context, we go in with an initial plan, And the journey might seem a bit zigzaggy when you just look at the journey itself, but there is a systematic approach to it. There are twists and turns. There are even going to be dead ends and backtracking and pivots, but all of these are par for course. Why? Because when you're moving really fast in areas of high uncertainty, we don't know what we don't know. We can't predict what the right turns are going to be. But the approach that I'll be sharing with you is one that uses data and learning to help course correct along the way. So we're not doing this as aimlessly as the picture on the left, but actually doing it more systematically, like what you're seeing on the right-hand side. So let's unpack some of these stages. So I already have this first milestone, product market fit. And as I said, it's already far out. So we're going to talk about some more closer intermediate milestones. So this is generally the approach that I take with all of my ideas and with all the teams that we work. Whether they are, I know some of you are probably working on ideas of your own. You may be at the idea stage. You may have even launched and maybe built a product. Maybe you have some paying customers. Irrespective of where you are, one of the first steps that I always recommend teams take is figure out what their business model story is. And that's the business model design. You don't know how much you need to grow. You don't know where you're going or where you're heading or what strategy you need to employ until you know what your ballpark destination is. So in other words, if you're building a skyscraper, you're going to employ different techniques and tactics versus building a nice cottage, 1-story or 2-story cottage. So you need to understand what the business model is that you're aiming for. And so that's why we start with the business model design step. This is, again, not anything new. Traditionally, we have used business plans in the past. Today, no one writes these because they're these big bloated documents that take too long to write. Even the people who used to make us write them don't read the entire thing anymore. And so not many people think about business plans, but the unfortunate side effect of that is that some do no planning at all, and that's not any better. So that line I draw down the middle, that's the no plan approach. That's not any better because you could go out and do a lot of the things that you learn in the lean startup, running lean, jobs to be done. You could go and do a lot of these interviews, find some early traction, but then still get stuck. Still end up with a business model that is too small, that is not repeatable, that is not scalable. And that's why we need to start with some kind of a blueprint or some kind of a plan to begin with. Now, what's different over the years is that we don't write these elaborate plans. We take a more lightweight approach. This is where tools like the Lean Canvas get employed. So the idea of the Lean Canvas is don't write a 30-page business plan, write a 1-page or design a 1-page business model. Like a bunch of building blocks, you put them together and try to stress test that model. If you were a civil engineer tasked with building a bridge, we don't start with building the bridge or building a skyscraper. We start with some kind of a model, whether it's software or physical. We then stress test the model based on the requirements we place on the design. And if the model breaks, we still don't build a bridge. We first fix the model. And that's essentially what this process is about. So it's not about perfection. It's about getting the ideas out of your head and describing a business model story. What is a business model? It should describe how you create, deliver, and capture value from your users and customers, right? So we can, so I know many of you are familiar, maybe have seen the Lean Canvas before. And so I'm just going to map these 3 jobs of the business model onto the Lean Canvas. And then in the questions section, if you do have questions, we'll come back and I can dive into more detail. But I think many of you are already familiar with the tool. So we'll kind of keep things just moving fast. I see Cameron did post a question. I'm curious about that. If you do know the Lean Canvas or have created a Lean Canvas before, if you can put something in the chat window, that would be great to see. So value creation. So when we think about how do you create value, dead center in the canvas is the value proposition. That's the promise you make. In order to make a compelling promise, we need to understand who's it for. So that's where the customer segments and early adopters come into the picture. And then we need to understand what problems are we solving. If you don't solve a customer problem or achieve a certain outcome for a customer, no value gets created. So these are the building blocks for value creation. When we think of value delivery, this is your classic solution and distribution. So what are you going to build? How are you going to deliver that value? That's where the solution comes in. And how are you going to get that value from the forest where it's made to the city where your customers are, right? So the roads, the channels, the paths are really what that channel box is really about. When we think of value capture, these are the economics of the business model. So we think about cost structure and revenue stream. And obviously, if those are out of balance, the model is not yet profitable or sustainable. And so in the beginning, that is going to be the case. We have this tension between how much value do we promise, how do we deliver that value, the cost of delivering the value, and how do we capture value. And for the first few years, we are trying to figure this out. By the time you hit product market fit, most companies should have these three things in balance, right? That's the definition of product market fit. You can create value for your customers, so you get more customers wanting to use your product. You can deliver it at a cost where you're at least breaking even and ideally profitable, right? And I use the word ideally because product market fit is still an inflection point. There's a lot of room for more optimization, and that's where startups will then pursue growth versus profit maximization. But product market fit is that point where this triangle comes into balance. There were two other boxes on the canvas. The key metrics box on the canvas is about value measurement, because this is important because not all of you have the same goals. Some of you want to build unicorns, some of you want to build lifestyle businesses, and there's no right or wrong answer. All of us are different. And so if you don't know what your key metrics are at the outset, how do you know if your idea is going to help you achieve the goal or not? So that's what the key metrics box is about, is we size. Sometimes I use a quote that I read many years ago by Bo Burlington: you need to build your life plan before your business plan. So kind of decide, if you're going to work on an idea for the next 3 years, what is that outcome that would make it worthwhile? And whatever the project, whether you're going to write a book, whether you're going to build a company, build an AI startup, what is that outcome you're looking for? Start with that and then see, can your idea get you there, right? So that's the idea of key metrics. The last bit, the unfair advantage, is the defensibility story. Anything worth copying will be copied. And going back to my earlier statement, because it's easier to do the product development stuff, if you come up with an amazing idea, there'll be lots of copycats that can quickly enter and do exactly what you're doing. And so we have to build defensibility, not necessarily on day one, because on day one, your ideas are going to seem as crazy as any other crazy idea out there. People tend to ignore it. But once you start to get some traction, you have to be ready for the copycats. You have to be ready for the incumbents wanting to enter the market and building what you're doing and trying to displace you, right? And so that's where the unfair advantage bit comes in, and the defensibility story. If we kind of put that high level kind of model or framework for running lean, this is what it would look like. Step number one, what I just described, is start with that lean canvas or business model story. Step number two is identify what's riskiest, not necessarily what's easiest in the model. Like this game of Jenga, we're not trying to get all the pieces out. We're trying to prioritize the ones that are the weakest ones and get them out of the way first. We then want to run experiments to test our model. And this, again, is pretty much the scientific method applied to entrepreneurship. Once you have understood your model and got it out of your head, once you have prioritized risk, we don't want to start with the easy things, but the hard things. We then start to test. And this is where we have, over the years, developed many tactics and recipes for rapid testing, rapid experimentation. And so you can take any idea, whether you're trying to build a rocket ship that goes to Mars, or you're trying to build a digital product, maybe a website of some sort, and we can run various forms of experiments to test if the idea has legs, if the idea is going to work or not. If it does, we double down on it. If it doesn't, this is where we have the course correction loop. So this would be potentially like a dead end or a pivot that we then come back, update the model. Richard Feynman said this very well. If you run an experiment and it fails, it's not the experiment's fault. It's nobody's fault. It's actually the model's fault. It's something that's faulty is in your model. And so don't beat yourself over it, especially if you get into this habit of prioritizing learning, not necessarily prioritizing the product, but the learning behind the product. If the product fails, there's usually some insight there hidden in the failure that will allow you to correct the model and get back on track. So it's a key mindset, is this mindset of embracing learning versus failing. And if you do this very quickly and rapidly, the failures become smaller and it feels a lot more like course correction and learning than big bang wipeout types of failures that some of us are accustomed to if you've done those kind of big bang product launches. The last bit I'll cover here, and then we can open up to some questions, is preview the rest of this model. So I spend the most time on business modeling because it is so critical to get that blueprint down. Once you know what it is that you're trying to build, we then prioritize what might be riskier in the model. And this is where there are some counterintuitive realities as well. For many of us, after we have an idea down, once we have our business model done, the next thing is what I call here demand validation. The next thing is, let's go and build a minimum viable product and give it to customers. The challenge here is that no matter what product you have in mind, it may seem small, but it always takes longer than we expect. It always is never complete. And so like Steve in my story, we end up polishing it, and quickly 2 weeks becomes 2 months, 2 months become 2 years sometimes, and we are still not satisfied. So we don't show it to anyone. And if you do show it and you get criticism, there's always a reason, because you're missing a few features, you're missing some more things. And so we go back and polish some more. And we hope that if we can find that magic combination, the product will work. So this I often call that build first. Sometimes people raise investment and then go down this path. But this is a bit backwards if you recognize one key insight, and that is that customers at the early stages of looking at any product don't usually buy a working product. What they are really buying is a demo of a working product. And so instead of starting with a working product, why not go and show them what you are going to build as a demo, not as a working prototype, but as a screenshot or a video or somewhat, if they need to see something working, maybe there is some aspects of a working prototype, but it is by no means a minimum viable product. It's by no means a product that they can use. And the job of the demo is to actually help you define what that minimum viable product is. So this is one of those techniques that we have developed over the years, is demo, sell, build versus build, demo, sell. Traditionally, we would build a product and then demo it and then sell it. But when you put it in this way, it seems very commonsensical. If you can sell the demo, why build the product? Even when Tesla was building their first car, it took them 2 years to actually build a car, but they sold it in 2 months. They could share you a Photoshop image of a car that was electric and had a price, and people bought it. Elon Musk today is selling tickets to Mars, and he has sold some of those tickets, and so is Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos. And that's, again, an example of a demo and not yet a working product. When Steve Jobs showed us the first iPhone, when he showed us the first iPad, those products were built in theory, but what we were looking at and what we were buying was a demo. And so when we can get into tactics about the distance between demo and MVP, but the message here is that most demos are all you need to actually get to a paying customer. And if you can't get to a paying customer, getting to measure traction or interest, and more likely than not, your first demo is not going to work. And so why build the product first? So build a demo and get the demo to sell, then whatever you've sold, go build that. That's essentially demo, sell, build. Now, this is a good place to start. This already will save you months in that roadmap. But the demo can also be I call it a multivariate optimization problem. And what I mean by that is that there are many moving parts to a demo. When you show a demo to someone and they don't like it, they may have objections. And if you are doing this in person, they may tell you what that is, and that's great. The problem arises when we try to do these things online. If you have a landing page and you're driving traffic and people are downloading or interacting with the demo of yours, you don't know why people aren't buying. Is it because your copy was bad, your demo was not so good, the graphic, the copywriting or the image was not all that great, the price was wrong? You don't really know, and so we start optimizing a whole bunch of things, and that's another recipe for going around in circles. And so for this reason, we at LeanStack actually advocate for a different approach. So if you start with the demo and you get traction, by all means, more power to you. You use the demo, sell, build approach. But if the demo is not landing, or if you aren't sure even what kind of demo to build, because there are so many possibilities, this is where taking the inputs in your canvas, the problem and customer inputs, getting outside the building and spending some time interviewing customers and talking to customers. This is where I know Cameron mentioned a job to be done discussion. we are big fans of jobs to be done. So uncovering what it is that customers are currently doing, what jobs are they currently trying to solve, all those insights are only going to help further either reinforce your own assumptions about your idea, or they're going to create those course corrections. You're going to recognize that the problem you think customers have is actually not registering in priority. And so that's why we want to start with problem discovery. So we want to get outside the building, take the requisite time to understand customers. The magic that happens here is that if you are razor focused on just understanding problems, it is not atypical after a few weeks for you to actually know more about the problem than the customer. Most customers don't take the requisite time to introspectively understand root causes. And if you don't believe me, any of you that have ever gone to a therapist or even a doctor for that matter, know what I'm talking about. We can't diagnose ourselves. We need other people to kind of see what we're struggling with, and your customers are no different. So if you actually go out there and talk to a handful of people, seeing where they struggle can give you a lot more deeper insights, which then allows you to define or design or reposition, if you already have a product, a better product that fits for them. At the doctor's office, after a doctor has given you a successful diagnosis, when they have convinced you that they know what's wrong with you because they're labeling your condition and they're describing your symptoms pretty accurately, whatever they give you next, the prescription you think is the magic bullet, you take it, buy it, and apply it. And that is how marketing also works. So this is a magic power we gain if we take the requisite time to understand customers. Your positioning, your value proposition, your demos just get that much better. And that's why if your demos work, there's no need to go through these steps. More often than not, I find all demos can be improved. And so even when we have customers that have demos, when we start really pushing them on how to optimize their demos, the best way to do that is to go and do some of this discovery work. Too often, many demos are training exercises or training demos where we're trying to show too much. We're trying to overwhelm the customer with all the features we have when the customer was fine with just hello. They would have bought what you had at the very beginning. When you show them dozens of features, you actually confuse them. And then now you've created this fear of complexity in their mind, right? So all of those things are important when we try to optimize even our demos. But taking this process from left to right, understand problem, design solution, this is where we now begin to craft our offers. I use the label here, a mafia offer, because if you take these steps, you actually create an offer that is so compelling, your customers cannot refuse it. So anyone who knows the movie The Godfather, you'll know where that reference comes from. So it's characteristic that when you do the requisite work, if you go through steps 1 and 2, you end up understanding your early adopters better than anyone else, better definitely than your competitors. You understand their problems deeply, not just surface problems, but root causes. And when you start doing that doctor type diagnosis and showcase your solutions, they actually fit like a glove. And it's not atypical to get 80-90% conversion rates if you do the requisite homework and you understand the right targeting for early adopters that you're aiming for. This step number 3 is where the rubber hits the road. So notice at this point, no product has been built. If you already have built a product, you can obviously come back and retrofit into this process. But if you were just starting out, by this point, step 3, you are only building a demo, getting that to sell. You want to sell enough of the demo before you actually start building anything. This is also very different. Even when I work with large companies, they are kind of used to dealing with large customers of their own, but they deal with them one at a time. When we share this approach of going out and understanding the market as a whole first, and then deciding how to act, that's also counterintuitive for them, right? So this is a slightly different approach where we're not rushing to build, we're rushing to make sure that there's enough demand for what we are going to build. So we're using demo, sell, build, and we're making sure that enough people buy or are ready to buy before we take the first build step. And this is what we call demand validation. So no product necessarily needs to get built here, but this is where you can come back with evidence and show that there is a pipeline of customers waiting to build what you have just demoed them. Then the next roadmap begins, which is the journey to solution customer fit. So if you kind of look at what we have done, business model fit is making sure that your business model story comes together. Problem solution fit is where we are trying to understand customers and their problems and making sure that the solution you have in mind is something the customer will buy. This could be delivered through an offer, a demo, crowdfunding. There are many vehicles for testing that. But once you have enough validation there, that's when you start rolling out your first minimum viable product, minimum valuable product, as I like to call these days. And then from there, we are iterating towards product market fit. And so here it is again, I'm going to not spend as much time because we'll open up to questions, but there's a lot of product kind of optimization that happens here. This is where all the customer success, all the onboarding comes into play. But the objective of solution customer fit is taking an initial batch of your early adopters and making sure that you can now deliver value to them. So if you look at demand validation is about promising value, which was the first job of the business model. And then, and then the solution customer fit is about delivering value at some small scale. And as you start to scale that up, this is where we head towards product market fit, where there's going to be this inflection point between getting the product right and now shifting into growth. And this is also an important, so product market fit is very critical, but as you see from this picture, problem solution fit is the first significant milestone that anyone in the early stage should really be aiming for, because you go from hoping people will buy your product to knowing they will if you can now deliver on it. So that's why it is critical. But even once you deliver the product, as we said, product development is easier, but not easy by any means. We have to then get good at product development skills and make sure that we can continually deliver value while we grow the business. And at some point when the product is good enough, maybe 80–90% good, we have to transition into firing our growth rocket. And this is where there are 3 or 4 ways that you can grow any business. And you want to start searching for those channels and start kind of leveraging that. So if you think of as a rocket ship, business model design is mission control, problem solution fit is firing your engines, solution customer fit and product market fit is achieving, going into liftoff and achieving some escape velocity. And then the story continues on when you're firing your rocket ship into space and maybe heading off to Mars and beyond. So I'll kind of use that as just the high level of the roadmap. We can certainly open up to questions that you have and come back and revisit any of these concepts.
So feel free to use the raise hand feature and bring any questions you might have in, or if you want to throw them in the chat. And maybe while people are coming up with some questions, we did have a good number of people who had created some lean canvases in there as well. And so that was some good feedback. So Kyle, it looks like you have a raised hand, so feel free to take away with your question.
Yeah, so I've done the validation with customers and created an MVP. Now reaching out to you kind of grow that to selling that to customers, do you recommend doing it as paid or trying to get the first people as unpaid, or what's a recommendation for that?
Yeah, so there is no business model without revenue. That's like one of the things I oftentimes say. And even when I go into this offer testing, when you say you've done the validation, typically I would encourage you to do the validation with price attached to the story, because it's very easy to go to a handful of customers and say, hey, look what I built. And you get the polite verbal commitment, which is, this looks amazing. I'd love to try it. I'd love to be your beta customer, beta user. And so whenever it's unpaid, you fall into the trap of getting the verbal yes. But when you now start to put money and they have to put skin in the game, those users vaporize. Like there's a difference between users and customers. A lot of tire kickers, very much harder to find paying customers. And so that's why we actually consider pricing to be one of the riskier, if not the riskiest thing in the viability of any business model. And so even when you are doing step 3 here, which you have done, but going back, so there's no harm in saying I missed that step. You can always go back with where you are and say you now have an MVP, you have a pilot. I would definitely encourage you to frame that around a paid pilot if you can. And even if they want to ask for a 30-day unpaid pilot of some sort, you want to go back and have a pricing discussion saying, if after 30 days we achieve these milestones and you achieve these outcomes, here's what the price will be. Do you accept that? Because if they look at the price and say this is not for them or for us, then it's game over already. Like they're not going to be your ideal customers. So I would encourage, bringing price into the story. There's no, you've already kind of moved a few steps ahead, which is perfectly okay. But in your pilots, framing that as a paid pilot would be the next best thing.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
Looks like Brenton, you had your hand up next.
Yeah, I was curious on what is the like acceptable time span between showing a demo and delivering an MVP?
Yep.
Because I imagine you can't just be like, hey, like if you, especially if you're selling, or do you try to like get money on that demo as well? Sorry for the two questions.
Yeah, no, that's great. And these are all, I mean, these are the tactical things that trip people, which, I find that the principles, everyone kind of gets this and nods their heads, but it's always in the tactics that where people say, yeah, this will work with crowdfunding, but I'm doing B2B and no one will give me money up front. And that's, what I want you to all kind of bring forward. So let's kind of unpack those questions. The first one is my ideal time from getting giving a demo to a customer and getting their commitment, whether that's paid or a letter of intent even, but getting their commitment, they want to know, when are you going to be ready? So the window between getting a firm commitment and delivering the first minimum viable product is ideally 2 months or less. And you can all kind of imagine that if a product came out where you had to wait longer than 2 months, and I used Apple earlier, even when they come out with their new phones, typically you can place a pre-order after the demo, after the keynote, and within 2 months they're shipping, because they know that if they make you wait any longer than that, we don't buy. We're just going to wait ourselves. And people will say, oh, if this is 6 months out, I'll just wait when we are closer to you launching, because a lot can happen in 6 months, right? So that's why 2 months is that kind of somewhat of a magic number. Now, of course, the hard bit here is timing that. For some of you, you might say, well, 2 months is too short. And this is where there are many other tactics and techniques when we are trying to build out the minimum viable product. You can reduce scope of what you're building. You can use, if you're familiar with recipes like Concierge or Wizard of Oz, there are ways you can use services. When I build software products of my own in LeanStack, they don't start off as software products, they start off as services products. But even the Lean Canvas that many of you may have used started out as a PDF and a workshop. I went and taught the Lean Canvas, and when I was able to repeatedly get people to get value just by services, so I got paid to deliver these workshops, I then turned it into a software tool, right? So you have to be somewhat flexible with your definition of MVP. It doesn't necessarily have to be the solution you have in mind at this moment. There could be a more creative way of delivering value to your customers that can get you to go faster. An extreme version of this, I just did a talk with a deep science, type of an organization, and a lot of their folks in there were scientists saying, our stuff is going to take 2 or 3 years to build. And so I use SpaceX as an example. If you look at SpaceX, their mission is to colonize Mars. Their mission is to reduce the cost of space travel. It costs billions of dollars to do those kinds of things, but the way they built a secondary business model to create the viability story is they began licensing out their rockets to NASA. So NASA stopped building their own rockets. They needed rockets to go to the space station and to go to space for exploration. And so they made them their customer. That's not their long-term story, but there are ways for, again, to have a big vision, but to look at your business model and start in different places to kind of move faster. That second part of the question was charging. Do you charge from day one? So whenever possible, yes. So I definitely want to have a pricing conversation. And if I'm within the 2 months of delivering something, we do want to use some kind of a firm commitment. And the pre-order is a pretty good firm commitment where we can separate, as I said, the users from the customers. And so we'd like to collect that. If the distance between what you're building and the MVP and the launch time is longer than 2 months, I personally will not take payment. I may take other forms of commitment, like letters of intent, email addresses if you were building a digital product. So when I was writing my book, my first experiment was, let me just collect an audience. So let me collect email addresses on my mailing list. And then at some point, I began to put the offer out and start collect pre-orders, and then started to go through that pre-order campaign. So hopefully that addressed the gist of the question there.
Yeah, it did. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Right. What other questions do you all have? I also shared the link to the LeanStack page, and specifically the Running Lean. I had some questions on how to access additional resources. So that'd be a great way to learn more about some of these tools and purchasing Ash's book. So what other question? Tim, yep, go ahead, take it away.
Thank you. Hi, it says Tim, but I actually go by TJ. But first of all, Ash, thank you so much. This has been really, really interesting to me. It's been validating for some things I've done and maybe cautionary for things that I need to be aware of. The thing that I'm curious about is this period of time between where you develop some sort of demo, whether that be, smoke and mirrors or actually something that's maybe not feature rich, but at least illustrative of what you're trying to accomplish. Seems like the time of period between customer validation that this is actually a good idea and commitment, that burn time seems really, really crucial, because if the idea is to go ahead with a product, but that's your first product, how do you build revenue in order to be able to, get someone to take that leap of faith? I worked in custom built animations for many years, and this is a standard problem. Like, how do you bridge this gap?
Yeah, so it kind of piggybacks on that last one, and this is where it's hard to answer the question in general with generalities. I mean, I'll give maybe a few more examples. But this is oftentimes where I, ask people if they're able and willing to bring their specific product challenge in place, and let's find a way to see if we can. So one of the first constraints, and this is this idea of a propelling question that's described in a book called The Beautiful Constraint. The idea of the propelling constraint is that you remove the limiting constraint from the equation. So you say, how do I launch my product if I have to launch in 2 months? If I can extend that to 2 years or 6 months, how do I launch something and get the customer to say yes? So just everyone, embracing the time constraint and not saying it's impossible is the first step. And then the next bit here is that the MVP is all about the UVP, the unique value proposition. So if I look at, if people don't know the Tesla story, I think a lot of people know that these days, but they were building an electric car. And one of the ways that they went super fast, most car companies take 10 years to do so. They did that in 2 years, is because they recognize that people can build cars, and yes, they need to build their own eventually, but what they were really building was the electric car. The promise was an electric car, and so why build an entire car? Why not license somebody else's car and stick their battery into it? So they focused on just building the battery, which was hard enough, but they focused on doing that. They didn't need a factory, they didn't need automotive engineers, they needed to design a car, they didn't need to go through road safety, certification, all those things. So they could short circuit 8 years of that journey and shrink it down to 2 years of battery development, retrofitting in a car, in an existing car, and selling it. That same technique, we call that the Wizard of Oz technique. You can apply in many cases, even when you said in the animation studio. I'm just going to, for illustration, since AI is this big thing, let's just say there's a new capability with AI that allows you to do something in the workflow that's never been done before. Rather than trying to build the entire workflow yourself, if you built a plugin that plugged into an existing piece of software, an existing platform that's already very popular, that's an example of how you can reduce scope. And the idea there is not to be satisfied with that. Like you're just like Tesla went and built their own cars eventually and have built their own factories and are doing all this thing. You can have a big vision, which is we are going to replace this existing incumbent solution. But to get going, to reduce scope, we are going to be a plugin. We're going to be a feature that we just sell as a plugin. And eventually we're going to expand and become so much better than the core platform that people will buy the entire platform. Right. So that's a strategic approach for having a big vision, but acting on it in a smaller way, but all about focusing and razor focusing on what is the thing that you can do uniquely that the incumbent cannot.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Sure. Okay, any other questions, comments?
Let's see. Right, looks like we got a couple more, so we'll go June and then Brenton.
Hi, Ash. Nice to see you. You
Yeah.
look great. I don't know if this fits into what you're talking about, but I have a two-sided startup, and can you where I need farmers to come on and list their products, and I also need consumers to check the prices. So to search for those products.
Sure.
And so could you just say something about two-sided models?
Yeah, so when we look at a model like this one, when we work with multi-actor models or two-sided models, you want to look at these, you want to fill these boxes from the perspective of both sides first. So in your case, when we look at it from the farmer's side, I would list them as, and this seems to be a marketplace type of a model, right? So the farmers have goods and then the consumers are looking to buy it.
Yes.
And the old way of doing this might be, go to your grocery store or go to a farmer's market. And I'm guessing that by putting it online, you're removing some of those inefficiencies or bringing more friction. Maybe there's like better pricing for their goods. Maybe there's a, it's more reflective to like the demand that the consumer will bear for eggs or whatever that is. So there are some inherent advantages, and that's the value proposition that your platform provides. But when we go back to the modeling step, you will have your farmers as your sellers, you'll have your consumers as your users, and you'd want to look at this business model from both their perspectives. So what problems how would farmers currently do this, and what problems do they struggle with? That would be where existing alternatives and problems would go. Similarly, what do consumers currently do when they are trying to buy produce, and what are they struggling with? Maybe they want more organic or they want more fresh. What are those things that they're looking for? And that's how I would model this out. So that's the story from a modeling side. You would have to do twice the work, and that's unfortunately the reality of multi-sided models, especially marketplaces, that there are two of everything. So you would want to have interviews with farmers, interviews with consumers, and ideally find alignment where there's a problem that both have that you can now offer kind of your platform to solve for. So maybe it's about pricing, maybe farmers get good prices and consumers get fair, they're happy to pay higher prices for better quality. So it could be something along those lines.
This is good because I did the lean model, lean canvas, but I only did it from one side, or I try to put both of them in one canvas. So
Sure.
that's great. I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the easiest thing is to do two. In our online tool, we do have, and it gets a bit more like you can put them on one if you use different color. So in our tool, we have a way to color like all the farmers and their problems will be colored, let's say, yellow, and then the users will be colored blue. So whether you use color coding or color post-it notes, but I think the main point I want to get across is that you do want to see both sides.
Thank you. Yeah.
Sure.
Got it. Love it.
Right.
Brenton,
ahead,
it looks like you're
Brenton.
next.
This might be a little bit out of scope, but I was wondering if you have any insight into kind of iterating on that pricing conversation. Because I imagine there's a lot of iteration that's possible. And
Sure.
I don't know if there's a demo feedback type of approach as well.
Yeah, and when you say iteration, is it toward finding the right price for your product that the market will bear?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll talk about just pricing in general. So the first thing that I often get pushback on is when people really are following the process. They'll say, I don't want to fall in love with my solution. I can't price my product because I don't know what that solution is going to really end up being. And if I don't know that, I don't know my cost structure, how do I price my product? And this is where, again, I tell them that that approach is what we traditionally call cost-based pricing, and that is somewhat backward. Customers don't care about your costs. And since I've been using Apple, imagine Apple coming to you and saying, we're going to raise the price of iPhones to $2,000 because unfortunately that's what it costs us, and we need to still make profit. We need to make 30% profit, so we're going to mark it up, and that's what we're going to give it to you. We would cry crocodile tears for that story. Like, we don't care what it costs Apple. We care about the outcomes and the value that we get from the product. And so when we are initially looking at pricing, I am less interested in optimized pricing, but more interested in fair ballpark pricing. And the best way to do that is to actually understand right from this canvas, what are your customers currently using to do the job, right? If I use the animation studio example, they're currently maybe spending $1,000 on this problem. Well, guess what? That's what they'd be willing to pay you if you can solve that problem in a better way, right? So this is what we are trying to first understand is, what is the problem that our customers face? What is the size of that problem? And we tell that by how much time, money, and effort is currently being spent on the problem. And if you don't know these answers, that's another cue for the problem discovery. The idea of problem discovery is going and getting those answers. So once you understand ballpark what the problem is worth, the distance between how much people are spending today and what value you can now deliver is where you find a good starting point for price. So if the people are spending hundreds of dollars, but your product is 3 times better, you could potentially be anywhere between $100 and $300 in terms of pricing. And I would urge you to go higher, not lower in pricing. It's like, unfortunately, some schools teach people to go for being the low-cost provider, but when you are the low-cost provider, there's nowhere to go but down. And so you want to try to chase the highest price that the market will bear. And so that's a way to get started. Where I heard kind of the iteration is that, yes, when you go to your customers, when you're showing them the offer, you also tell them the price. And I use the word tell and not ask, because it's not the customer's job to set the price. That's your job. If you actually ask the customer what you're willing to spend, if they're a sophisticated buyer, they're going to lowball you because they want a good deal. If they're not a sophisticated buyer, they're just going to guess. And that's also not going to usually be a good price because nobody wants to spend money. So it's not their job to set pricing. It's your job to say, this is how we set the price because we look at the problem we are solving. This is what we think it costs you, and you want to get their acknowledgement. This is what we think we can deliver in terms of outcomes and value, how much time, money, and effort we save. And that's why we think this is a fair price. So when we go into offer delivery, there is a whole script. There are whole mechanics for kind of good ways, I wouldn't say bad ways, but good ways to actually get that story out there. And that's how we iterate on the pricing. If you do hear objections, of course, you want to react to it because maybe there's something you didn't account for. And if it's a valid objection, you need to then incorporate that into your pitch. But if it is something that you can diffuse away, then of course you diffuse it. But it's your job to set the price and make a case for why that's a good price for your customers to buy. Yeah, so
Thank
that's
you.
and pricing is never ending in, I'll just add, maybe pricing is never ending in optimization. Once you launch the product, sure, you can probably go up in price further. And so we are constantly trying to push the limits. But when we're initially starting out with that MVP stage, as I said, it's more important to be in the striking distance of a fair ballpark price than being down to the cent accurate, right? That's not going to happen. Even Amazon to this day is always tweaking their prices by cents. And when you've got millions of people buying, that has big impacts. But at the very early stages, we only have maybe dozens of people buying. So if you're even off by $10 on either side, it's not going to be a big deal.
We have time for maybe one more question. I saw Floyd, you're unmuted. I don't know if you had a question.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yep, go for it.
I'm in the digital marketing, and I'm sure you've seen how AI is on the scene now and how rapidly some of the technology is changing. My question is, does your product address how I can use your product to adapt and do something rather quickly.
Mhm.
I'm sure you probably understand what I'm trying to get at. So, all right.
Yeah. So I'll take a stab, and so on the first bit there, I will say that AI, like anything before it, these are these macro technological shifts that happen. So we had, of course, industrial revolution, the internet, all of these types of things. Of course, everyone seems to think that the pace is picking up, so AI is going to be adopted faster than any of those other things, and that may be true. But the point of all of that is that when there is one of those changes, there is going to be many various products that come in. There's going to be a bit of the hype curve. Some of them will go by the wayside, some of them will stick. There are going to be, I think, some, of course, big ramifications of where AI ends up kind of getting applied. The challenge with all of those is not so much whether the technology will work, it is whether it will work and how quickly it will work. So more the timing of it than the technology itself. So we've been talking about AI and many other things, even like, you can take like in the sustainability side, there's all kinds of things that are working in the lab that if they could work at scale, we could solve our climate change problem like overnight. So there's always a timing challenge. And that's where I would say these kinds of methodologies really help, because you can take a problem, whether it's in writing, whether you said, digital marketing, whether it's in the factory floor or automation, but you can take those problems, understand what are people doing today, can AI solve a problem today, and is it ready for prime time use, and how can you package that in a way to where people will start adopting it. And those are like all that offer testing that we talked about. And it doesn't take, you don't have to build it even, it more is about packaging that demo and going to your audience and saying, if I gave you this instead of what you're currently using, would that be of interest? And of course, at some point you have to build a prototype, but yes, you can use a lot of these same techniques, and it is somewhat solution or technology agnostic, irrespective. It could be just a services company. You could be, doing old school coaching or consulting and apply these techniques. You could be building the next AI or even, beyond technology, but it fundamentally comes down to who are your customers? What are they struggling with? What will you build that will make their lives better? And can you build that and give it to them? Not just promise it, not just tease them, but actually give them something that delivers on value.
Okay, can I follow up quickly just on finding your customer, identifying your customer? Do you have a technique that covers it across the board, no matter what niche you're in?
So in the beginning, it is so the idea of the business modeling is it is I'll just use the unfancy word guessing. Some people say creating hypotheses, but you are making guesses at who that customer segment is. But because we know they are guesses and not yet grounded in learning, maybe that's why step number one is so important. And so there are techniques, and you will hear about this in the jobs to be done. In my book, I cover the interviewing technique, but there are techniques to go out and use customer interviews to understand who those customers might be and what is characteristic about them. Like, why are these more primed for being early adopters versus not? So that's kind of what I'll say for now, because I know we're at time. Yeah,
Well,
go ahead, Cameron.
Yeah, I was going to say, no, it's I think a great segue to definitely check out the Running Lean book. It has a variety of scripts for you to help kind of narrow down those problems and understand the nuances of your customer and start to kind of pull some of those themes out that will help you identify that. So I highly recommend that. And I threw the link in the chat a little bit earlier, and I can make sure when I follow up with everyone that you get access to that. The last two things I would share, we do have additional sessions coming up, as I shared at the beginning. So I'd love for you to hop into that innovation series and see some of the additional sessions. We do have kind of sessions that build on or are, complementary to what you heard from Ash around things such as jobs to be done, and and a variety of other things like testing business ideas, which will help you kind of look at different lenses of your lean canvas. And then would love your feedback. So if you can hop into that survey and provide some of your thoughts and feedback. But as we conclude, want to say thank you, Ash, for spending the time with us and sharing your expertise and thought leadership around all of this. And I know we had some people who've already created lean canvases, so we look forward to them making future iterations, and those that haven't, to make those first ones and starting the process of stress testing their business model. So we appreciate you being here and sharing your expertise with everyone. And all of you entrepreneurs, thanks for being in the space and taking the risk to build something great and solving our world's problems. So we appreciate you being in the space, and we hope to see you all at future sessions of the Innovation Series, and have a great rest of your day. So thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.